Welcome to Broadband Breakfast live online for Wednesday, November 24th, 2021. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Day before Thanksgiving. Very excited for this opportunity to talk about digital inclusion, digital equity, its role in broadband adoption and use. We here at Broadband Breakfast have a motto. You've probably heard it many times: better broadband, better lives. We are about making sure we have the infrastructure, and with that infrastructure, we get it to everywhere that it can be brought to. And so now is obviously a very crucial moment in broadband infrastructure because of the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act just less than 2 weeks ago, actually just over 2 weeks ago, November 5th, 2021. And with the president's signing of it about 9 days ago. So we are very excited to talk about that, to have that as our topic today for our Broadband Breakfast Live Online. As a reminder, we're here every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time, so that we can catch people all across the country. And next Wednesday, December 1st, we are going to be talking about privacy issues and the privacy issues associated with obviously the broadband world we're in, how privacy issues are impacting both telecom and technology companies. On December 8th, we'll be back live in person as well as live online. We call it Broadband Breakfast for Lunch, and that will be at Clyde's of Gallery Place, but we will also be live online for those of you watching remotely. We're going to be talking about the implementation of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And then the following week, December 15th, we're going to be talking about partnerships and their role in broadband deployment. So those are some of our upcoming events. And I also want to make sure to give a shout out to our sponsors here at Broadband Breakfast. We are very grateful for the support that enables us to keep these programs growing. In a little while, I'll put a link into the chat window so you can go to the page for them, but they include Utopia Fiber, Lit Communities, Broadband Now, Broadband Money, Samsung Electronics America, Render Networks, Positron Access, the California Emerging Technology Fund, and Powerhouse Management. Thank you to each of our sponsors. So let's go ahead and turn to the core of our discussion. We've got a very special guest to join us here. I'm going to welcome Hernan Galperin, who will be speaking with us and sharing some of his thoughts on this topic. I'm also going to talk just a little bit too about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the provisions it has dealing with digital inclusion, digital equity. But just briefly, and this is on the page for those of you who have registered, who are watching it on our website, you'll see this right below. Hernan Galperin is an internationally recognized expert on internet policy and digital inequality, and he has used surveys, field experiments, and other quantitative methods to understand the determinants of broadband adoption and use. And we just have loaded onto the page a couple of resources and links of his that you can see. Infrastructure, high-speed internet is as essential as water and electricity, and broadband internet in Southern California to get major investments in and overhaul from this passage of the Biden infrastructure bill. So with that, Hernan, let's turn it over to you for a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your background and the research you've done on this topic. Of course, our topic today is giving thanks for better broadband, and both the better broadband that we have and the better broadband that's coming through some of the recent legislative developments. But over to you, Hernan.
Thank you, Drew, and well, good morning, good afternoon. happy Thanksgiving. As Drew says, I think there's a lot to be thankful this year for those of us who work in broadband, and obviously the passage of the bill is a major milestone. And before I talk about it, just quickly, as Drew mentioned, I'm an associate professor at USC, and I've worked on broadband policy both in the US and internationally for several decades. And very passionate about the topic, and I think in particularly I very committed to understanding digital equity and the barriers to digital equity, and I think the passage of the bill goes a long way. It really is a bill that has equity at its core in many ways, not just the part that it's called Digital Equity Act. I think the overall bill has equity at its core, and I think that's very significant because I think that's something that may have been a goal of other policy initiatives, but it wasn't spelled out, and it wasn't a core driving element of the broadband policy until the infrastructure bill that just passed.
Drew, I think you're muted.
Yes, all of us fall victim to the occasional mute buttons, and that was my episode. I want to share with you all a link to a piece on Broadband Breakfast here. Just give me one further moment to do that here. In this piece on Broadband Breakfast, we talked a little bit about the digital equity portions. So here it is. So in the piece that I am sharing, too many screens, I may not have the right screen. So just again, bear with me here for a moment. That's one of the things we've learned from COVID is we have to acknowledge and accept snafus. Okay, I do see it showing up. So this is what I wanted to share with you all. This is a piece, one of our reporters, Justin Perkins, posted this here. And we're talking about this is actually in the Build Back Better piece. So I wanted to say that there's not only provisions in the bill that has passed, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There are provisions in the new legislation that has passed the House that address broadband and other aspects of broadband policy. I'm just going to go ahead and stop sharing this here and go back to our main screen here. One of the things that Hernan, we've talked about, let's just lay out some of the aspects of the infrastructure bill again. So things that have actually passed is what we're looking to address here. And what I'm thinking about, and I'm going to again hopefully have a little better luck this time, share this screen. We have been working together with Broadband.money and building out an incredible resource of tools and information on Broadband.money, which we encourage you to check out and to follow through on it. What I'm going to share now is just a piece that underscores some of the aspects of the digital inclusion efforts that are associated with the broadband portions of the digital infrastructure of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And so once again, I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully we'll have a little bit better luck this time. So this is a piece that builds on, it's actually Amy Huffman and Josh Mamura. They wrote about this on the digitalinclusion.org website of the National I'm going to forget my acronyms here. The national group that deals with digital inclusion issues, and they highlight here. I'm going to just again, hopefully, blow this up just a little bit so you can see it a little bit better on our shared screen. 3 categories of grants under the Digital Equity Act. The Digital Equity Act, of course, is a $2.7 billion component to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There are $60 million for state planning grants under the Digital Equity State Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program, and $1.44 billion to develop state digital for states to implement those plans. And then there's additional $1.25 billion over 5 years for local government, nonprofit, and community anchor institutions to vie for digital equity competitive grants. So this is just important because I want to just call out the $2.75 billion that's available to states and to entities that work with states for digital equity grants. And so, Hernan, we were just chatting before about how this is one provision and how the IIJA does have digital equity components at its core, as you were saying earlier. So I don't know if you'd like to add anything about that before we kind of can go to some of your research that you've done on this topic.
Sure, I think it's a very centerpiece of the legislation because it acknowledges the fact that broadband policy needs to have not just deployment components, but also components that promote adoption. I think for too long, the prevailing sentiment and approach was, let's build networks, let's build out to where perhaps networks are not built, or services are deficient or are not good enough. And this obviously favored the high cost area, rural areas. This legislation brings to the fore the fact that it's not just about building the networks, but also about promoting adoption, promoting digital literacy, promoting subscription, and helping people subscribe. I think the new subsidy is also a very important component, and obviously a very expensive component of the bill. But all that is the recognition of the fact that build them and they will come is just not good enough. We've seen networks being built, and we've been underwhelmed by the fact that many households, many folks just are not subscribing. Now, there's many reasons behind that. Why are people not subscribing? My research points to cost and affordability, not just my research. A lot of research points to cost and affordability as a key component, and that's been addressed through the new subsidy, which has been made permanent, as you know. But it's more than just cost. It's literacy. It's understanding what you can do with broadband, because we talk about broadband and perhaps being using more the academic terms that we use. We think of broadband as what we call a general purpose technology. It's a technology that allows you to do many things. Now, if you've never used broadband, it's just not that obvious. What is broadband good for? What can I do with broadband? Now, I think the pandemic has changed that. The pandemic has clearly changed that, and we recognize easily how critical it is. It's really essential. But perhaps before the pandemic, it was, if you never use a computer, if you never use broadband, it wasn't that obvious. Why do I need broadband? What is it? What can I do that I can't do without broadband? And that's typical of what, again, we call the general purpose technology, that the user, there's so many uses that if you need to use it to understand what can this do to me. So the digital, the grants to the states, the grant to the nonprofit organizations are meant for that, are meant to educate people, to promote adoption, to promote literacy, to help people understand, to sign up, to to really take advantage of these opportunities. That is not just about, again, building the infrastructure, but building the human capital that goes along with that infrastructure.
So tell us a little bit about the work you've done thus far on researching digital equity issues, Hernan. What have you found as you get kind of pre-IIJA? What are some of the issues that are keeping broadband adoption at lower than we should see it?
Well, as I mentioned, I think there's a good sense that there's no one answer. There's many dimensions to this problem, and there's many factors that prevent people from adopting broadband. And there's been for a number of years, there's been a discussion about what the role is of cost. Some folks saying cost is really the key, others saying it doesn't really matter that much. There's some people that would not adopt broadband even if it's free. In my research, and I think this has been validated in other studies, I believe that cost is still the main factor. Now, it is true that it's not easy to ask this question for people that had never had broadband, because it's a very, imagine a new technology comes along and you've never used this technology. And I ask you, well, how much would you pay for this technology? And you don't know anything about it, or you know very little. So those questions, when we do surveys, sometimes those questions are difficult to ask. I believe, and my research, I think, supports the idea that cost is the main factor, but is not the only factor. The literacy is a major factor. And literacy has many dimensions. Literacy is about understanding what you can do with broadband, about knowing how to use equipment. It's also about how to protect yourself from hackers and privacy issues. There's a lot of concern about privacy issues, about cyberbullying, about other issues that people mention in survey work that we do. So all these components have to be addressed. It's not just about teaching people how to use the computers, how to use the internet, but also how to take advantage of the services, of the opportunities, how to protect themselves from hacking, from bullying, from many other things that concern people who have not had experience with broadband before.
So let's back up, Hernan, and learn a little bit more about the University of Southern California Annenberg Research Network on international communications. Obviously we know what University of Southern California is, but tell us about this research network at USC. What is it all about? Is broadband its main focus, its only focus? Just tell us a little bit about the organization and your role and your background personally, Hernan.
Sure. So I'm director of this research group at USC, and our goal really is to be the leading center and knowledge center for broadband in Southern California and California in general. I think there's something to be said about local knowledge or state-based knowledge. The situation in California is different from situation in other states for a number of reasons, and we hope to be the place to go for knowledge about broadband in California. We've had great success with a number of our partners, and I should mention some of our funders. The California Emerging Technology Fund, which is an organization that's been around for many years, connected to the CPUC. I think it's well known in the digital equity space, and we work closely with CTF. We've done a fairly large survey of broadband adoption with CTF early this year, and some of the results that I mentioned come from this survey. We've more recently are working with Pew Trust, which has generously funded our research. on understanding subsidy mechanisms. I think there's a lot to be understood about the fact that even though subsidies are available, surprisingly low numbers are the participation rate is fairly low. I'm sure you're aware that Lifeline has been declining. EBB is doing a little bit better than Lifeline, which is great news for given the fact that EBB has only been around for about 6 months. But still participation rate in EBB is quite low. We have estimates that put it around just around 20% of all eligible households. So think about that. Only 1 in 5 households that could take advantage of a $50 rebate on your broadband bill. Only 1 in 5 households is actually taking advantage of that. So participation rates are very low. And Pew has funded our research on understanding why. Why do we have such low participation rates? Is the subsidy mechanism not right? Is it about outreach? Is it about perhaps combining subsidy of the service with equipment, with literacy? So we need to understand more, because I remember when EBB was started, really started mid-May, and many of us thought, well, there's just not enough money. $3 billion, that sounds like a lot, but there's not enough money. This money will run out in 6 months. And here we are. And the money hasn't run out, but it's been only spent about a third of the money, if so. So there's clearly a question of why people are not taking advantage of this opportunity. So that's part of our research.
Let me jump in on that. That's actually a great question here. And Lifeline, of course, was a very minor benefit prior to the emergency broadband benefit. It was like $10, right? Unless you're on tribal lands, in which case it was $40, right? And then EBB changed that to a $50 a month subsidy. Now it's dropping down to 30, but it's going to be permanently, right? So the Affordable Connectivity Program, the new name of the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, will be $30 a month. But I think, these programs just have aching bureaucratic requirements and restrictions on them, particularly Lifeline, EBB. I don't know if it's just inevitable that FCC programs kind of come out that way. I mean, have you studied what's keeping these programs from being more effectively used? Are there comparative state programs, Hernan? Does California have a state component program? What does existing research or your knowledge kind of tell you about the bureaucracy component that keeps people from getting involved in these efforts?
Well, that's exactly what this new program, this new research with preliminary ideas and findings. One of them is exactly what you mentioned, Drew. For example, California has always done better in terms of participation with Lifeline, and now is doing also quite well. I mean, quite relative well with EBB. And part of the reason is California does supplement Lifeline with a California Lifeline supplement. So there's more money than the $10 for California Lifeline's recipients. But more than that, there's a concerted effort at the state level to promote Lifeline. There's a page at the CPUC where you can put your zip code, and it gives you which ones are the Lifeline participants in your area, which plans are offered. There's efforts at the local level to help people sign up for Lifeline. So there has to be a concerted effort to help people jump those administrative burdens. And of course, the administrative burdens need to be lower. But here, the reality is that there's always a balance. And here's the balance. The easier it is, the fewer requirements, the more open you are to what we call leakage, which is program recipients being not being the ones that you are targeting. So there has to be some balance between ease of sign up and making sure that those who are receiving the subsidy are the ones that are really needing the subsidy. And there's also good research to show that those in most need are really not the ones receiving the subsidy. One, again, because they are not the ones that understand the value of broadband. They are not the ones that perhaps they are undocumented. That's a very California, not just California, but that's very, very relevant for California. So there's many reasons. And interestingly, we've also looked at other programs. We look at housing subsidies, we look at food assistance. And this is not unique to EBB or Lifeline. This is a problem, this is an issue or a challenge for all kinds of social protection programs. And we have some ideas of how to address it. We have some ideas of how to make this simpler to sign up, but also the one thing that all the research shows works is that the programs need to have outreach components. And this is where the Digital Equity Act does, I think it's going to go a long way in helping people understand the value and sign up for the programs, understand which plan is best for my family. How do I sign up? There has to be some sort of hand-holding, if you will, that then is not just about putting the program out there and hoping that people will come knocking on your door, because clearly we saw that doesn't happen with Lifeline, and it really didn't happen with EBB either.
Right. Well, we want to open this up to questions by our audience. We've got a great group of people on Zoom. We obviously stream this live on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter as well. Thank you for the questions you've offered. We have a question from YouTube asking about what are the ways we get people to sign up for these programs, kind of what we've been talking about here. I'm wondering, Hernan, while we're waiting for some of our audience members to post questions on Zoom or the other platforms, could you speak to these capacity grants, right? The State Digital Equity Capacity Grant and the Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program. I highlighted this in that piece that I focused on at the top, and you write about this in your piece for the conversation. Tell us a little bit about what you're understanding about these capacity grants and the role they'll play in enhancing broadband adoption.
I think it's a great foundation, those capacity grants, but every state will have to figure out what this money will be used for. And this is where it's going to be interesting to see what states do with these funds and with this opportunity. Again, the experience of Lifeline and EBB and other social protection programs show that states and local level, I think there's also a very important role for local level organizations and governments and municipalities to take a lead and take advantage of this programs. Part of the money will go to planning, but most of the money, actually, as you mentioned, Drew, the money is divided about in half going to states, half going to a competitive grant for local organizations. And the Equity Act mentions repeatedly that this has to go to promote digital literacy and promote adoption. And this is what we've seen. Some of the most successful programs that we've seen, if I may give you examples, for example, schools. Schools have been very successful, and this is where the local component is. Who is closer to a family that clearly needs broadband during the pandemic so kids can attend remote classes? That's a school. And the schools have done amazing job at signing folks up for EBB. Mm-hmm. We've heard examples of schools. As you know, schools played a big role in providing food assistance for families. And we've seen examples and we've heard examples that schools were putting information in multiple languages. When they deliver the food boxes and bags, they would put a leaflet about you should be signing up for EBB in that very moment. So there has to be that very local component, and school is very much a trusted, what we call a trusted messenger. I mean,
Yeah.
families trust schools and they trust the teachers. So that's the kind of initiative that really, my hope is that the Digital Equity Act will scale up and will take those good practices and scale up to the state and hopefully to the national level.
We've got a question here from Leighton Olson. Great to hear from you again, Leighton. He's in Illinois, at least most of the time, as I recall. And it's kind of two separate questions. Let me actually split them apart. The first component is, are there research efforts linked with the transition to FCC/State Utility Commission rules to implement the Broadband Data Act of 2020, including multiple data entry on 4 local location databases? Well, that can seem to get into the weeds, that question there, but let me just kind of say to our audience, the Broadband Data Act, or Data Act, it's actually an acronym. It's really about improving the quality of FCC broadband maps, right? And this has been a major source of criticism and frustration for all kinds of people in the broadband space, that the broadband database, which is, basically a stale document that hasn't been updated promptly, and when it is updated, includes census blocks that don't have complete coverage. That's kind of the core of the problem. And the Broadband Data Act will require the FCC to go to pretty much an address level, okay? So Leighton's asking about research efforts linked with the transition to the implementation of this better broadband mapping. And he's even highlighting multiple data entry points. I don't know, what are your thoughts about the broadband mapping piece and research efforts on availability of broadband, Hernan?
Well, I think it's a critical piece. Thanks for that question. As a researcher, I live by the data that is available through Form 477 and also similar efforts at the state level. I think in California, we are in a little bit of a better place even today, because the CPUC, the California PUC, does have its own data collection as a check on the data that's submitted by the ISPs. And I have a small piece that I'm happy to share where I show that when comparing FCC Form 477 data with CPUC data that is checked, you see enormous differences in coverage and in deployment numbers, just by comparing FCC data with CPUC data. So all this is to say, this is critical, and it's even more critical now that there's so much there's money on the table. There's the $40 billion on the table from the infrastructure bill that has to be allocated, and it's critical that we have better mapping, a better sense of where the needs are.
Yeah.
Now, I have to say, I'm somewhat disappointed that the infrastructure bill did not include a few things that we researchers have been asking for. One of it is pricing data. We still don't
pricing
have
data.
Pricing data. Yes. There's a provision in the bill that I believe will collect data on the plans that are supported by the new subsidy. So those have to be reported by the carriers, but it does not include something that was left out of the data bill, which is the pricing issue. But other than that, I think all the research community is extremely excited and anxious to see the new mapping efforts and the new maps that will come, which we will absolutely be delighted to work with.
Well, the questions are beginning to stack up here in the comments, so let's keep going with them. I just want to highlight, that's a great point you just made, Hernan, about every state is not in the same situation. And because California has invested in better broadband mapping already, they're going to be in a better spot. And that is so true right now. It's going to be the states that have advanced state broadband offices that have been taking mapping seriously that are really going to be in the best position going forward. Let's just get to the second part of Leighton's question, which is supporting semi-annual local community hub community sourcing, broadband data mapping accuracy assemblies, and links with local family and business outreach efforts to connect and support use in each census tract and blocked, as well as digital economy areas. Very interesting question. Leighton, feel free to supplement this or add on more in the comments. What exactly would you like to see, Leighton, more in this area? Or I should say, let me ask it of Hernan, what are some of the data points or the ways data can be helpful on these digital equity planning grants that we're really talking about here? This 2.75 billion component of money, roughly half to states, another 1.25 billion of that 2.75 billion to local governments, nonprofits, and community anchor institutions. What are some of your thoughts about research feeding into those digital equity grants?
Thanks for the question. I think it'll be the grants, again, the half of the 2.7 that goes for competitive grants is earmarked for this local organizations, and I think they will play a critical role. The research community has always worked quite closely. I've worked closely with many organizations that work in promoting digital literacy, promoting, for example, I work quite closely with Everyone On, Human IT, all these organizations that are doing recycling of equipment and putting equipment in the hands of low-income folks. And I think this will be a major boost to these organizations that again are critical. If the initiative succeeds, it will be because all these local organizations that are closer to the end user. You have to think the federal government is quite removed from the end user, but these organizations are on the ground, and they are the ones that can really connect to those users. And I see a question about libraries, and
go for it. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
I think libraries is a key piece. We did a small project with the LA library downtown in downtown LA before the pandemic, and if you go to the library opens, I believe, 10 a.m. By 9 a.m. folks are lining up to use the computers. So that just tells you how much libraries matter for digital inclusion. They're lining up before the library opens, and the library offers amazing resources, not just the computer. There's people at the library, again, and I'm highlighting here what the library in LA does, which is a fairly well resources comparatively. They have folks that help people type up a resume for job applications. They have folks that they have classes. They have all kinds of support that goes just beyond, here's a computer, do whatever you want with the computer. There's actual support for using broadband in ways that could improve the lives of the people that are going to the library to use this computer. So libraries, absolutely, I agree, it's a key piece of this puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Keep the questions coming. We still have time here. Jason Hardeback asks, could you speak to how academics view the role of subsidies in policy? And then he says that it seems that the emergency broadband benefit is being marketed as a long-term solution instead of a stopgap. No one believes that SNAP solves hunger. So why should a broadband subsidy be thought of any differently? That's a great question. I put a link in the Zoom chat for a study on this that I'll come to, but I want to ask that question straight to Hernan and see what your reaction to it is.
Right. Look, my thinking on this, and this is aligns with a lot of people that thought about what we call in infrastructure investment. There's often a problem of the private incentive is not equal to the social benefit. That is, the private incentive, which is motivated by where can we make good business? That's the ISP thinking. Where can we make a reasonable return on our investment, which is perfectly reasonable for a private ISP. That's what they should be thinking about. That often does not align with the overall social benefit that broadband could bring. And that's where the subsidy comes in. The subsidy is trying to bridge that gap between what are the investment incentives of the ISPs and what are eventually, in the long run, the social benefit of having everyone or most folks, most residents connected so their kids could attend remote classes and people can apply and do their work online and telehealth and so many other benefits that aren't quite captured by the private return to the ISP. So the subsidy is trying to, I think, rightly so, bridge that gap between what is the return on the private investment and what is the larger return on the social welfare that comes from having more people connected, particularly folks that are not connected today, low-income folks who are struggling, are just coming out of the pandemic. And this is where that subsidy will come and be a critical piece.
Thank you for that reaction. In the Zoom link, I did provide a link to one of our expert opinion pieces. We accept expert opinion commentaries, op-eds, you might call them. It's the very right tab on the top of Broadband Breakfast, and we try to get at least one a week. We have many different voices. We had one about 2 weeks ago by Will Reinhardt. Early reports show the emergency broadband benefit is not reaching its intended audience. And this actually builds an incredible database, and it's trying to track the 3.14 billion component because, as we've noted, EBB came with the Appropriations Act, very tail end of the year was passed. And so it has been about 6 months, 7 months, 8 months that it's been a live program at the FCC. So there's at least some data already. And, we've talked about how, bureaucratically it's hard to get it, but this program drills in and says that, paradoxically, the program is not going towards communities where there is little uptake of broadband. Early data analysis shows that areas with low broadband uptake are less likely to enroll in the program. So, I'm not sure exactly where this is going. There's a lot of conflicting thoughts. Jason, you've added another thought here. I mean, one way to think about this is, there's obviously the capital expenditures necessary to build a broadband network, and then there's operating expenditures. And the traditional model of, I won't say Lifeline or EBB, but I will say E-rate. The traditional model of E-rate has been subsidizations of recurring expenditures over and over for normally private networks. Now, there were some changes to the E-rate program over the last 5-6 years that opened that up and allowed libraries, and we could have some great people from the Schools Health and Library Broadband Association talk about these changes over the last 5-6 years and how they've enabled libraries to build their own infrastructure, roll their own, so to speak, roll their own fiber, and I think that there's a lot of great things that can come of that. I mean, this is sort of moving us towards a discussion of the utility model, right? And what exactly is the fiber that is in the ground and where it's going. And we're advocates for better broadband everywhere. And so by and large, that means getting more fiber everywhere, right? And maybe we can't get it to every single home and chicken coop, but then again, we can make huge progress. And so my hope is that the IIJA infrastructure funds will go to support this kind of robust infrastructure. And if we could have some tools to nudge along, greater openness on these networks, open access networks, then we'll be able to see greater and greater benefit, capacity, use of those networks. And this is kind of where we come to the topic we're talking about, Hernan. Well, then how do we get those last people for whom cost is an issue subscribing to the network? And again, that's a bit of a assemblage there of thoughts, but Hernan, do you have other thoughts about?
Yeah, no,
the
and
EBB?
I think it's a great point. I agree that the EBB has not done a great job of connecting newly connected households. That is, most of the households, there seems to be evidence pointing that most of the households that took advantage of EBB were already connected, and it's not bringing a lot of new connections. We don't have good data to really know this fact is absolutely true, but there's good indication that of that again, most of the households were already connected. Now, I asked myself, is that a bad thing? Because, for example, we did in our survey, a latest round of survey, we asked low-income folks who were connected, had broadband, do you have to do sacrifices on essentials to pay for broadband? And we actually mentioned like clothing and food. So did you have to cut down on clothing or food to pay for broadband? And 1 in 4 low-income folks who had broadband at home said, yes, we really had to make sacrifices on other essentials to pay for broadband. So in our mind, reducing that burden of broadband with the subsidy is a positive thing. And we also asked people, have you had to disconnect from broadband during the pandemic because you couldn't afford a bill? And 1 in 5 low-income households said yes. At some point, we couldn't pay our bill. We had to disconnect, or we couldn't pay our bill. So helping people to stay connected, but it's because it's not just about connecting people, it's help them stay connected through the ups and downs of a job market, of a life cycle, where things are going well and things are going not as well, and help people stay connected through that and provide a cushion of connectivity is important. Now, having said that, I still agree the EBB has to do a better job, and hopefully the ACP will do a better job of connecting those who never had broadband or who only have perhaps a wireless data plan and should now be considering a residential connection. I agree with that statement that we have to do a better job at connecting those who just did not have connectivity before the subsidy.
Well, thank you. Leighton asks another question, which I'm going to summarize as being about how do we better take advantage of let's call them communities, right? Built around schools, built around libraries, built around health services. Let's call it the broader community anchor institution community. Let's just talk about that for a second or two, Hernan. What does your kind of work show about the role of community anchors in helping get higher capacity or the use of that capacity?
As I mentioned before, I think it's critical. Libraries play a critical role. I mentioned our research with the LA Public Library has really, it really was eye-opening again, just going to the library in the morning and seeing people queuing up to use those computers. Yeah. And the types of services that were available. And of course, that is not the case of every library, not in California and not around the country. I think if libraries can do more to not just help people use a computer, a lot of the folks that we saw at the library were unhoused. So the EBB doesn't quite address that piece, because if you don't have an address or a permanent address, you really can't get the EBB, or any of those types of subsidies that are based on residential address. So libraries are really a key piece of this puzzle. Community centers, all kinds of community anchor institutions are really critical, and schools play a critical role. I mean, there's no question. We mentioned this, and they are the institutions or the organizations that have the closest and the families trust the schools, they trust the teachers, and they go along. Now, having said that, I'm always reminded by some of our partners, we can't just think of K-12 families. And when we look at poverty, at least in California, the majority of people who are poor don't have kids. So we have to think of seniors, and that's a critical piece, actually. Seniors, we have to do a lot more in this space of connecting seniors. In our survey, actually, we showed that seniors made, of all the age groups, during the pandemic, seniors are the ones that made the most progress in connectivity. Why? We believe because seniors were at most risk for COVID. So they stayed home, and suddenly they have to switch.
How did we get them though? How did that happen? Like, how did they get the training or the skills or the?
We couldn't capture that in the survey, but my thinking is, look, this is the at-risk group. These people that understood, I have to stay home, and now I need to understand how to connect with my grandkids, or do my job, or shop online. And again, this is a technology where it's a lot of learning by doing. You can have literacy, but it's a lot of learning by doing. They still trail other groups. So we still have 65 and over as the group that has the least people who say they use the internet on a regular basis, but they made the most gains during the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, Deborah Doyle has repeated the point here. She says government associations and groups forget about the reach of libraries. Libraries can and should be informing these groups, but they're busy helping their patrons. Right now, we've had library groups and librarians on the show. We should probably have more. It's a great reminder, Deborah. And I think when it certainly comes to this digital equity and inclusion issue, we want to make sure that libraries kind of factor in to the solutions, right? And did you have any additional thoughts on the library question, Hernan, and how we can really fully leverage their reach in these broadband inclusion programs?
I'm reading Deborah's comment, and I absolutely agree. I think it's money that's absolutely a great investment in public libraries. As I said, we were privileged here to work with the LA Public Library, but I recognize it is unique. It is a fairly well funded and has a good facility. In fact, it's a beautiful facility in downtown LA. If you ever have a chance to visit our LA Public Library in downtown, it's just a beautiful facility, and well resourced. And the folks there recognize the value of what they are providing in terms of not just connectivity, but all the other pieces. As I mentioned, when I saw that they had folks helping people type up their resume and send job applications and type up a resume to apply for community college, I mean, that's the kind of support that the libraries are best positioned to give, and that's unique.
Wonderful. Let's kind of close out by going back to this article and this link I shared that will be on this page after the event here. Three takeaways from the 2.75 billion devoted to digital equity and inclusion that are in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, according to this article, are, hey, we need to kind of celebrate this moment, figure out how we're going to make use of this 2.75 billion. Second, breathe, right? Okay, take some time to adjust, to figure out. And third, to begin planning, to step back and think about what you need to do to reach more people who are disconnected from your community. Hernan, what are some thoughts you might have about these planning grants and how nonprofits, let's focus on those organizations, the nonprofits, the local governments, the community anchor institutions, how they can be most prepared for digital equity competitive grants. And I might mention again, as I mentioned earlier, broadband.money is a very important resource for being able to access and connect to others who are applying for infrastructure grants. And now over to these digital equity planning grants. What are some of your thoughts about this topic, Hernan?
So this is where I'm somewhat concerned, because not every state has that ability to experience, ability, and the training, the expertise to be able to develop those plans and to help the local organizations take advantage of this plan. So I'm somewhat concerned that this is a case where we say that those who are already better positioned will do better. California, I think, will do well. We have a very committed state in terms of digital equity. We have expertise. We have organizations that are very committed on the ground. But my concern is, what about other states where the network of NGOs and libraries and state officials perhaps are not as experienced in the broadband field? So I think this is really just the beginning. States have a lot of work to do, and I hope that states that have perhaps not been so active in this space will step up, but perhaps they will need some support. I think the bill does have a good, there's a lot of mechanisms in the bill that have the NTIA and the USDA and other, and labor and education, other departments step in when states are perhaps not taking up on this opportunities. So I hope that it happens, because the bill does rely, and the bill in general, I think, does give a lot of give states a central role to play. And I think we hopefully will see that, but we know that states are differently positioned to take advantage of these opportunities.
Well, before we thank our speaker and each of you for being with us, I want to again call attention to and give thanks to our sponsors: the California Emerging Technology Fund, Positron Access, Render Networks, Samsung Electronics America, Powerhouse Management, Broadband.money, Broadband Now, Lit Communities, and Utopia Fiber. It's been a pleasure spending time with our guest, Hernan Galperin. Thank you for being with us for this hour, as well as each of you on Zoom or YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. And once again, we will be back next Wednesday, December 1st at 12 noon Eastern Time. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for being with us, and have a great Thanksgiving, everyone. Take care.